All right. All right, we're going to get started. I call the St. Paul City Council to order. Roll call.
Prince,
Here.
Tolbert, Yang,
Here.
Ballinger,
Here.
Jalali,
Here.
Naker,
Here.
Council President Brenmoen.
Here.
6 present, 1 absent, being Councilmember Tolbert.
Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance if you would like. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consent agenda items 3 through 15 are before you for your consideration.
All right, colleagues, is there anything on consent that we should be taking for separate consideration this afternoon? All right, seeing none, Ms. Prince moves consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
6 in favor, 7 in favor, no one opposed. The consent agenda is adopted. Item 16 is a staff report on the 2022 property tax trends update from Ramsey County.
All right, and it looks like Ms. Houston is getting something set up in the front. This is a report, an annual report to the council from Ramsey County about property tax trends. And I think this, as we're moving towards setting our levy limit today, this really sets the stage for what is the lay of the land in terms of property tax demand increase, market ups and downs, as well as St. Paul and beyond into Ramsey County. So we appreciate this context. This is always one of my favorite reports of the year, and so we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Welcome.
Thank you, Council President Brenmoen and council members for having us. I'm Heather Bessler, the County Auditor Treasurer and the Director of Ramsey County's Property Tax Records and Election Services Department.
And I'm Pat Chapman. I'm the interim county assessor for Ramsey County. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And our set is a little awkward for two people because there's the two microphones are actually just directed at the speaker. So if you don't mind, when you go back and forth, just position yourself between the two microphones and deal with our clunky system. Welcome.
Certainly.
I'm trying to get the presentation out. Just kidding.
While Ms. Houston is getting that up, I'll just share that we've mentioned this a few times today, but yesterday the City Council held a public hearing in advance of the budget, our budget deliberations, and we went out into the community. We found that it's sometimes challenging for people to get downtown, especially right now with Wabasha and 4th Street torn up, to come in and to testify. So we do hold a meeting in advance of the budget in community. We were at Como Lakeside Pavilion last night. We had very good attendance. About, I would say 100 people showed up to share their thoughts about the budget in advance of our deliberations. And we appreciate their support. We also appreciate the work of our City Council team and also our media services folks for getting an incredible set up for us. Somehow or another, we did it in a kind of another windy night successfully, but it was a great way to start out our budget process deep in the community and listening to our stakeholders. And that's all the riffing I've got.
Thank you, Council President. we're here.
While you work on that, Ms. Houston, would you like us to quick go on to the next two items for discussion?
Council President Brenmoen. That would be, I think we need just a moment. Thank you.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay. I think these are quick items, so it's not giving you a ton of time.
Item 17 is Resolution 22-70, amending Civil Service Rule 28.b.5 to eliminate language disallowing consideration of years of employment and related education and experience in setting wage for internal candidates as a firefighter. This item was laid over on September 14th.
And Ms. Prince encouraged the Local 21 and management to get back together and do some more talking about this item, and they took the opportunity, and we understand that both sides are comfortable with us moving forward with this today. Thanks for the nudge to encourage more negotiations. I think when everyone's on board, we're in a better place. So we'd take a motion from Ms. Prince. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted. And item 18 is, is that one going to take longer? No, maybe not. Resolution Public Hearing 22-233, considering and adopting the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendation of the administrative law judge, and request of the Department of Safety and Inspections by upwardly depart to revocation of the cigarette tobacco license held by Bright Star, Inc., doing business as Tom and Joe's Market for the premises located at 684 Western Avenue. And the public hearing was closed on September 14th.
Right, and we did have an opportunity to hear from the plaintiff's attorney at that time, and it was a request for 1 week for further deliberation from Councilmember Ballinger. Mr. Ballinger.
I move to approve the recommendation of the administrative law judge.
All right, so there's a motion from Mr. Ballinger. Any discussion? I would just say I fully support your motion. I think it is the right decision. In this case, it is an upward departure, but I think the facts were there, and I fully support what the administrative law judge came to us with in your motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted.
Mr. Lally moves suspension of the rules. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
Resolution 22-1483, waiving the 45-day notice requirement to add a malt off-sale small brewery 128-ounce to existing licenses to Urban Growler Brewing Company, LLC, for the premises located at 2325 Endicott Street.
And this is not a public hearing?
No.
No. All right. Ms. Jalali moves approval. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted.
Councilmember Prince moves suspension of the rules. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
Resolution 22-1503, extending a warm welcome and best wishes for a successful visit to Alejandro Garcia El Toro, Second Ambassador of Cuba, and Tatiana Martinez, Vice Consul of Cuba.
Ms. Prince.
Thank you, Council President Brenmoen, and thank you for letting us bring this item in under suspension. We recently learned that there is a delegation of Cuban dignitaries visiting City Hall next Tuesday, and we wanted to be able to present this resolution to them, acknowledging their visit. Alejandro Garcia del Toro, the Second Ambassador of Cuba, and Tatiana Martinez, the Vice Consul of Cuba, will be in town for the Ordway performance of renowned Cuban-American musician Nachito Herrera and the Havana All-Stars this Saturday, where the dignitaries will be introduced by recently named Baseball Hall of Famer, Tony Oliva. They will also be involved in other meetings organized by Global Minnesota, Westminster Church, and other organizations. As many of you probably already know, St. Paul has many historic connections with the people of Cuba. Back in the turn of the last century, St. Paul's African American community staged several Cuba pageants beginning in 1898, celebrating Cuba's struggle for independence from Spain. The city of St. Paul City Council adopted a resolution against the U.S. embargo of Cuba in January 2019, and we all see regularly the statue of Cuban national hero Jose Marti that stands in the hall of the second floor stairway, a poet, philosopher, and martyr of Cuba. As I mentioned, the diplomats will be visiting City Hall next Tuesday, and we will be presenting them with this resolution, and I invite any of my colleagues who are available to join us in the morning next Tuesday. So with that, I move approval.
Thank you for bringing this in under suspension and also for the further comments. My COVID loss was a trip to Cuba. And we're so excited to go for the benefit of the people of Cuba and just did a ton of research heading into that trip. And so when I saw this resolution come in, I was pleased that they were coming to visit us and happy to support this resolution. Other thoughts on the motion from Ms. Prince? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted.
All right, I got a thumbs up from Ms. Houston, which tells me that we're good to go on technology with the property tax trends from Ramsey County. Welcome back. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Can the slide be advanced, please? Thank you. It's not moving. Yep, not moving.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. Apologies with the technical difficulty here. Today's presentation will include information about the assessment 2022 information and the payable 2023 information for property taxes. We'll also discuss the property tax refund, the new development that's occurring throughout the county, specifically in St. Paul, present a market summary, and then we'll talk about the new TNT supplement that it was mandated this year. And then we'll visit the property tax models for payable 2023. Please advance the slide. There we go.
So just a reminder of who determines the property tax for everybody in the city. The legislature sets some stuff. The county assessor, what we do is determine market value and apply the classification. And then the taxing jurisdiction figures out the amount of money they need and sets the levy. And that's how we get to property tax. Next slide, please. Here's our historical value trends. You can see that the county as a whole is at $69 billion, almost 70. That's an all-time high. And an interesting note is that all of our neighborhoods in St. Paul are back to full value from the time of the Great Recession. So all neighborhoods are back to 100% of their value that we had before. And you can see the city right there at $33 billion, about $33.5 billion in market value. Next slide, please. Here's our 22 assessment data. Overall, the city of St. Paul looked like a positive 11.76%. Residential was about 13%. Commercial, you could see, barely moved. Industrial properties moved about 11%, and apartments about 14%. So the value is going any tax burden will shift to those properties with higher growth. So you can see that residential and apartments and the industrial complex is going to take up any of the official extra tax burden. And you can see suburban-wide similar numbers as the city, and the county-wide numbers down there on the bottom, everything kind of moving the same way by property type. Next slide, please. And here is the St. Paul residential single-family median value. So now these are just single-family houses in each one of these districts. And you can see a number of the areas with the most modest values had the biggest growth. Affordable housing being an issue, you can see that it's becoming more of an issue here. Next slide, please. New developments throughout the city of St. Paul. You know, we've got some exciting ones with Highland Bridge, Snelling Midway developments, a lot of good development in the city. Future developments, we're looking at the Hillcrest development. Interested to see what happens there, and then the Rice-Larpenter Gateway. Next slide, please. So to just sum up the 22 market, Ramsey County aggregate estimate growth is at an all-time high. So we're as valuable as we've ever been. Continued strong growth for the residential market. Development continues throughout the county and in St. Paul. The economic outlook remains solid for most real estate segments. We're interested to watch the retail market next year and see what happens there. There could be some big recovery there, which is hopefully a big thing for the county and the city. And I think that's all we've got here. Yeah. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks.
Okay, switching to the property tax side of the world. For payable 2023, this is the first year for what's being called the new TNT supplement. This notice will go out with TNT notices in November. This is a parcel-specific notice that provides budget information for the county, the city, and the school in which the parcel lies. And then just a reminder on where we're at in the overall TNT process in relation to this notice. It is a 2-year cycle, and we're still in the first year. The values are still changing. It's dependent on things like tax court and values that we receive from the Department of Revenue. Those values lock in when we calculate tax rates. And so the estimates that we are talking about today is a snapshot in time that will change throughout the budget process and as we further refine the data and receive the levies from the jurisdictions.
So when do we take the last snapshot?
Yes, Council President Brenmoen, the last snapshot of values is taken immediately prior to calculating tax rates, which this year will happen the first week of October.
Okay, so we're getting close.
Yes.
Right, and for folks new to this process or new to this kind of presentation, TNT is Truth in Taxation.
Correct.
And it's a notice that's required by the state of Minnesota to alert people to what their taxes are likely going to be. And we talked about this yesterday at our budget meeting. In advance of budget deliberations, the TNT, Truth in Taxation notice, is actually in December. It happens very late in the year, kind of after we're through budget deliberations, so it's been challenging for us with those rules, and so I appreciate the update, but just some context around why do we do these levy limits that we're about to do today early in the process, and that's to be able to create this document to send out to people to alert them of what their property taxes will likely look like next year.
Absolutely, thank you for that, Council President. So at the end of year one, as Council President Brenmoen indicated, taxing jurisdictions will set their final budgets and levies, and homeowners will receive their finalized property tax statement in March of 2023. Next slide, please. So getting into the meat and potatoes of property taxes, this year fiscal disparity distribution levies went down for Ramsey County and the St. Paul School District, but the city of St. Paul is seeing a modest increase. Overall, the fiscal disparity pool is down 2% for the 7-county metro area, and that's primarily driven by the 4.3% decrease in Hennepin County for their commercial and industrial properties. As I said, the fiscal disparities distribution value for the 3 authorities received from the pool also dropped. This is in part due to the drop in the overall pool and also due to receiving a smaller share than in the previous year of the pool. And then for the county and school, the prior year tax rates did not increase enough to offset this drop in the distribution, whereas with the cities, it did increase enough to offset that to be realized in this levy change and the positive distribution levy for the city. Next slide, please. This slide shows the value and estimated tax percentage change year over year. I would like to make a note that this slide focuses on all residential property, whereas slide 6 focused on single-family residential property. And so that's why you'll see a little bit of a variance in the median market values from planning district to planning district. The levy for the city or for the St. Paul School District isn't available yet, so that is not factored into this model, but all other levies, estimated levies, were available for these models. And so most areas are seeing a property tax increase. There are 8 areas where estimated taxes are increasing by more than 12%. On the far right-hand side of this model, you'll see a column was added for the special property tax refund. That refund is for homeowners, and it's specifically only based on the amount their property taxes increase, and is not calculated, does not take income into consideration when it's calculated. Next slide, please. So moving to the property tax refund, last year when myself and the county assessor, Luis Rosario, presented to you, we first shared information about the property tax refund and that it was something that was becoming of more importance because property tax regressivity was starting to emerge as an issue within the county. And so we began tracking data. This tracks 2 years worth of property tax data, the 2018 and the 2019 property tax refunds. We can see that utilization for the homestead refund, for both homestead refunds, went up slightly, but for the renter refund, it did go down. And so we can use this data to help inform our engagement, our community engagement and education in further years. Also, it helps us understand where maybe we need to focus legislative efforts in the future for the property tax refund. Next slide, please.
So to claim your property tax refund, you can go to the Minnesota Department of Revenue website, and it's listed here. And this will show you how to file for your property tax refund. There's a homeowner refund. There's a renter refund. It can be based on income, so there's 3 opportunities here to get a property tax refund, and this is the best way to fight property tax regressivity, and this is a great way. Another thing to remember is that the circuit breaker one, or the one 12% or greater, has no income restrictions like Director Bessler mentioned, so that's a real good one for everybody in the city that can participate in that. Next slide, please.
Okay, moving back to the models. This depicts a median valued single-family home in St. Paul. The model shows several items. At the bottom are the levy assumptions. Again, we don't have the school district's levy, and so that is not factored into this model. The top depicts the shifts of unrelated to levies, so fiscal disparity, the homestead exclusion, and other special programs. Below that are the shifts related to the levy changes, and then on the right are the shifts, is what will appear on the truth in taxation notice that this resident would receive. And then just for note, this property would be eligible for a maximum special property tax refund of $66.
Ms. Naker and then Ms. Prince.
Thanks, Council President. So it looks like we always try to communicate about the difference between a percent levy increase and a percent that an individual's property taxes will increase. But it looks like what you're showing here is that all told at this point, the percent increase for an individual property owner would also be about 15%, if I'm reading that right.
Council President, Councilmember Naker, right now, with the way the estimated levies are sitting, yes, we're seeing a 15.2% increase in property taxes for a median valued property in St. Paul.
Ms. Prince?
If I'm understanding the special refund correctly, that's an amount that the county knows now how much, or when tax bills go out, how much somebody's taxes going up, how much they would qualify for. So why don't we do that calculation on the tax bill so that people don't have to do that on their own? Because we know that people don't know how to apply for it. I mean, there are all the issues of access and equity and language barriers and all that, and that's a known amount right now that could be reduced from their tax bill. Have we looked at that?
Council President, Councilmember Prince, thank you for that question. The special property tax refund, all the data needed is known by the county except for if the property owner received a special property tax refund in the previous year. That is taken into consideration when the special property tax refund is calculated. It is something that we are working with other professional associations within the state to look at some legislation to move the special property tax refund from being a program where that's mandated by statute that a resident has to apply for it, and to being something that the county can work with the Department of Revenue on to issue straight to a taxpayer instead of having them apply for it.
Okay, thank you. We'd be interested in supporting that, I think.
Yeah, that has long been the call of this council, and that's the best answer I've heard so far. So thank you for that, and really hoping that next year we hear yes. I know getting legislation through the Capitol is a breeze, so you'll take care of that. But I do believe if we can get to a point where it's automatic, that's ideal. And I think for all of us, that is the state that we want to be in. And I'm really glad that we're working with others to get to a solution, as opposed to, yep, it's frustrating. You're right, it's frustrating. It's what we've heard in the past, so that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Can I control? No. There we go. Same premise on this model, but this one is for median value apartments. On this one, it's seeing a 6.7% property tax increase, so less than residential. We know that residential took the main hit with values this year, but it's a modest increase comparatively. Next slide, please. And then this final model is for a median value commercial property. This is only going up 1.5%. And as we saw from Director Chapman's presentation, commercial property values remain pretty flat this year. Next slide, please. And then these final two slides follow the famous friends or the selected properties that we've been following for many, many years now. For the residential properties, they're all seeing property tax increases. Those at the higher value end are seeing less of a property tax increase than those that are in the more affordable range. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is for the commercial properties that we have followed. The two top ones under the $500,000 threshold, seeing small property tax increases, and then the commercial properties above that $500,000 threshold are seeing a property tax decrease. And with that, that ends our presentation, and we'd be happy to stand for any more questions.
Great. And these documents are written in very small print, and they are available online. So if folks are interested in looking deeper at those, I know we talk a lot about percentages compared to dollar amounts. We heard some things today about how finally some of our areas that have been chasing the pre-recession values have gotten up to that place. So we should see things level up for those properties as well, hopefully going forward. But this is always interesting as we look at our city. Ramsey County, for context, is the smallest county in the state of Minnesota, and St. Paul is about 56% of the population of Ramsey County. So we're a very unusual setup here. I think you can probably, you know this off the top of your head, but isn't it like Anoka, Washington, and Ramsey's economy is similar to the size of Hennepin on its own. Yes. So, it's, Hennepin's a huge county with a huge city of Minneapolis in it, and Ramsey's kind of just the exact opposite, littlest county with a big city. And so it's always interesting to see how things measure up at this presentation. Any other questions from my colleagues on this presentation? Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. Just another thank you for the information, and especially for the conversation about the property tax refunds. I know we talk about this every year, but we leave money on the table as Ramsey County residents. And so in addition to what we discussed today for some future long-term changes, I'm hopeful that your office will be sharing with us the social media and the flyers and the other things we can do to help promote these to our constituents.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Just a remark on Council President Brenmoen's point. I seem to recall from previous presentations like this one in previous years, there was a data point that used to stand out as a big picture one, which was that Hennepin County has basically Ramsey County has something like 2/3 the residents of Hennepin County, but like half of the tax base, just to put into proportion what you were describing. And I'm wondering if we could follow up with you, excuse me, because of the latest census data and how we know those numbers have likely changed, to get some comparisons, because I think that's also important to understand the tax burden on our residents and be able to compare across the Twin Cities. So if you all would be a good place to go for that, I would love to personally get that info. So,
Yes,
okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so before we get into the next item, because I know we have some visitors here from Creighton-Durham Hall, we have some people who have maybe never been here for this particular council meeting. We are setting what is called the levy limit, and that is basically a high water mark for what we will be setting our city's limit at. We have to do that for the city itself. We will be doing that for our Housing and Redevelopment Authority. We will be doing that for our library, which rolls into the city's levy. This is not the final levy amount. It is just our starting off point. So we'll be doing that today, and rather than adjourning and waiting a week and then reconvening, we're going to do it all at the table. No one's going to change seats, but we'll change who's chairing based on who is the chair of that particular entity that we're all members of, just in a different hat. So with that, the city council will be in recess.
Is adopted.
We are adjourned as H.R.
St. Paul City Council will reconvene. Roll call.
Prince,
Here.
Tolbert,
Here.
Yang,
Here.
Ballinger,
Here.
Jalali,
Here.
Naker,
Here.
Council President Brenmoen.
Here.
7 present, no one absent. Item 19, Resolution 22-1422, approving a 2023 maximum property tax levy for the Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
And this item was discussed in the HRA meeting earlier today. Mr. Tolbert moves this resolution. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted. Item 20 is Resolution 22-1458, approving a 2023 maximum property tax levy for the city.
All right, and this is the last item on this part of our legislative gymnastics event. So is there discussion? We have been presented with a levy of 15.73. I don't know. Now I'm not recalling. But this council has established a trend of digging very deeply into our levy from the time we set our levy limit till the time that we pass our budget, looking for creative spending solutions, making sure that we're using our dollars wisely, making sure that we're investing our resources in our housing priorities and our safe neighborhood priorities and our equity priorities. And so we will be committed to doing that together and in partnership with the mayor's office. We need to all be on the same page by the time we get to December. So I'm going to support the levy as proposed in this resolution and as proposed by Mayor Carter and the administration, but with a commitment to work very hard to try to get that number down. We heard people at our public hearing yesterday saying they're hurting and they're struggling and trying to make ends meet, and we understand that, and so we will be doing our diligence on our end in the coming months. So I'll be supporting this, and I look to my colleagues for other comments. Ms. Yang, then Ms. Prince.
Thanks, Council President. I will also be supporting the proposed maximum property tax levy, and I'm just really thinking a lot about all the testimonies we heard yesterday. For us as council members who see so many of these numbers, those stories are so important because these numbers do translate directly into the salaries for workers, and the safety within the workplaces, dignity within the workplace, and also the quality of life for residents in our city. And so I take that really seriously. And I feel that there's so much for us to really dig into with all the things that were brought forward in the conversation around how we can make sure that our workers have competitive pay, safety in the workplace, how we can fix up our streets, and make sure that children in our communities have wonderful programs and activities to go to, day after day. And so these are all things that I'm thinking of and hold as priorities for not only our ward, but my ward, but our entire city as a whole, because we're all so connected. And so that's something that I will be definitely working with all of you on.
Thank you. Ms. Prince?
Yeah, this is a tough vote to take. I am going to support setting the maximum levy, but I am really thankful to all who have reached out to me in my office by phone, by email, who came to last night's public hearing. And I want to say clearly now that I am committed to working to reduce the tax levy from that proposed by the mayor, which I believe fails to recognize the realities facing our city's property taxpayers. From high levels of inflation, I believe interest rates are being raised again today, the impact of the pandemic, even as we are recovering from it. And as we saw in the property tax, the county assessor's presentation, among the highest tax increases this year are in neighborhoods that I represent and that several of us represent that are among the lowest income areas in the city, where property values have gone way up, but not necessarily the incomes of the property taxpayers. So for the east side neighborhoods I represent, we just saw that the tax increase will be 17 to 20% in Dayton's Bluff, Battle Creek, and Sunray. For low-income homeowners and those on fixed incomes, these increases are simply not sustainable. So I really appreciate, and I am confident that my colleagues are equally committed over the next 2.5 months to, through our budget deliberations, to moving us toward a better, more responsive final budget when we vote in December. And I do want to say, I think Council President Brenmoen, you do a good job of explaining our process and how it works and why, although the mayor presented his proposed budget in mid-August, we are every week hearing from the departments and seeing the budget details. So we just had our last two actually not our last ones yet. We're still receiving detailed budget presentations from our department heads. Today we heard two of the largest ones, Public Works and the St. Paul Police Department. So I have so much confidence in the process that we are doing now as a council. And again, I'm confident that we're going to be able to make some cuts that are responsive to the concerns of the community.
Okay. Other comments? Ms. Stinker.
Thanks, Council President. I want to echo my colleagues' thoughts on this. I'm going to be supporting the levy limit today, but I consider a 15% levy increase or property tax increase to be absolutely unacceptable when people are struggling so much, and especially when we know that those tax increases hit our lowest income communities the hardest year after year. I'm only not proposing a different levy limit today because I don't know what that number would be yet. We need to get through our process, hear from our departments, look for where those efficiencies can be found, but I'm absolutely committed to bringing this number significantly down, and I'm glad that there seems to be a lot of agreement on that around this table.
That number is 15.34.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't remember it earlier, but it's been 15.34. Any other discussion before we set this levy limit, this high water mark? All right, seeing none, we'll take a motion from Ms. Naker. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted. Item 21 is final adoption of ordinance 22-40, amending the appendix to Chapter 409 of the Legislative Code pursuant to Section 17.07.1 of the Charter and Section 409.20 of the Legislative Code to expand the commercial development district at 2078 Ford Parkway to include 2170 and 2128 Ford Parkway and 966 Mississippi River Boulevard South.
Mr. Tolbert.
For approval?
All right, this is final reading on this item. Mr. Tolbert moves approval. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item 22 is public hearing on ordinance 22-37, amending Chapter 193A of the Legislative Code pertaining to rent stabilization.
All right, and this is a public hearing on the rent stabilization. There was one adjustment amendment, putting a cap on the vacancy adjustment amendment that had been added the previous week. We had to reopen the public hearing, lay it over for 1 week. The intention is, if there are no changes today, to vote on the final amendment for the rent stabilization ordinance today. And there are some in other issues that we will continue to work out going forward in the future along prevailing wage and other carve-outs. But for the sake of getting education and outreach and our systems in place, time is of the essence in terms of moving forward so our departments can get to work on establishing these processes. So we are going to hold a public hearing on that item, the amendment that we passed last week, or other, before we call this item for a final vote today. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? If you're here to speak to the item, please come on up. You know the drill. And I say that because I've seen some familiar faces. If you could just say your name, tell us where you live, keep your testimony to 2 minutes or less, and when you're done, sign in at the ledger for the public record. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Brenmoen and council members. My name is Arlene Datu. I'm a leader in Isaiah, and I live in Ward 2, and I am a renter. I also served on the mayor's working group for rent stabilization. First, I'd like to lift up the organizing that happened with Housing Equity Now, with SEIU and others, to pass rent stabilization last fall, despite very powerful special interests and the $5 million that was used to try to defeat it. I want to acknowledge and thank every person in St. Paul who voted yes for rent stabilization, 53% of the electorate. And I'd like to celebrate Council members Mitra Jalali and Nelsie Yang and Mayor Carter for voting yes with us last November. But I'm here also to express my extreme disappointment at the attempts to gut this policy so that it doesn't reflect the will of the voters as much. I am particularly concerned about the tens of thousands of renters who won't be able to benefit from this policy because of the amendments that did not pass, re-including renters who live in affordable housing, and reducing the new construction exemption from 20 years to 15 years with no look back. Yes, full vacancy decontrol was overturned, but what took its place? An 8% cap plus CPI with just cause, and that cap is still too high. And my concern is that it still impacts housing stability and affordability for St. Paul residents, with the greatest impact on people of color. My fear is that it appears we have some council members who seem to be more accountable to corporate landlords and developers than to the more than half of St. Paul residents who are renters and people of color. I support a no vote on this policy as it currently stands. No matter the outcome today, the work will continue with this rent stabilization policy to make future changes so it includes renters who live in affordable housing and helps out more renters who need the support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, just remind people to keep your comments to 2 minutes or less. It's not a lot of time, but a lot of people, we've heard your perspective, and welcome. Come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Nasro Ahmad, and I am a home care worker and member of SEIU Home Health Care Minnesota. I am a renter in St. Paul with my son who has a disability and require full-time care. I'm here today to thank you for your work on making sure our city has a strong protection for renters. It is so important to address our housing crisis and make sure working people like home care workers can afford to live in our city. During the COVID, I really saw the impact for how the cost of housing affected families. This system just isn't fair. This ordinary is good step to toward leaving the playing field. I talked to another woman recently who was sharing her story about having issue with her landlord and how her mental health was impacted. It is happening so many people, rent goes up and low-income people always get hurt. I'm glad this is ordinance to keep the 3% cap. It is how the new protection for renters from unjust eviction and does not allow unlimited rent increases when renters leave. Those are all strong progressive pro-renter measures, and they are why I argue to vote to approve this ordinance, and I still hope you will work in the coming week to make sure that affordable housing units are included, because leaving out some of the people who need it most doesn't feel fair. And I hope you will also work to make sure that anyone working our building new housing development gets paid a fair wage. I want to thank for Mayor Carter for always standing with renters and all the council members who have worked on this ordinance. I hope you will vote yes today, and we will continue working to make sure we are working together so that all renters have what we need to live safely and call St. Paul home. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, we got to keep you to 2 minutes. We have had 2.5 already, so just if you can keep your eyes up, I'll put a hand up when you have about 10 seconds left. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Council President. My name is Marcus Troy. I'm a member of WESCO, West Side Community Organization, volunteer board member. I'm here with 2 other members from St. Paul's East Side community. We have other members in the gallery here. We're also members of the mayor's task force that happened earlier. When we voted, we all had a third vote. The renters represented here, we had a vote democratically. It was the property owners, Mr. Tolbert was on that board, and the developers. It seems like what we presented when we voted for has been watered down, diluted, pretty much null and void. What we're here to fight for and let you guys know, we're going to continue to fight. You yourself stated last week, Madam President, it's a process, it's an experiment. Okay, we get that. But it seems like everything that's happening so far has not been to the advantage of the renters. So what we're trying to do after last week, we kept on hearing it's a bad policy, but it's the best we can get so far. I don't agree with that personally. I'm here to say we're going to continue to fight. November's coming up. We're going to get more numbers, higher than the 80% that showed, more than 31,000 voters, because it seems like you're not really paying particular attention to us who bought the voters, who bought this policy to you. It came to you guys. You've had 7 other meetings, it seems like, without our input, and you pretty much just gutted what we pretty much wanted for us. We bought this to you guys. We wanted to keep our local renters local in our own communities. I don't want to run into her people coming from the east side, Claire's people, all 4 corners of St. Paul. So that's my input on this.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Madam Amy. I just want to say I'm really angry today because this is not policy making. I've never been homeless until I came to this state as a mother with her children in the streets and as an individual. What I love about this rent stabilization policy that gives these 30,000 renters that came out and voted the opportunity, like I told you on the phone, the opportunity to be able to save some money to be able to have a house. What I love about this policy is that it allows the renters not to pay the utilities for the landlord. What I like about this policy are people have a place to call home. The most impacted people that I'm seeing today is a lot of African American being homeless. The reason why I told you I was homeless, because that's what these amendments is just going to do. 20-year rollout exemption, an 8% increase in rent. My rent just went up 8%, and there's nobody to hold my landlords accountable. And tenants are paying utilities. So what I'm here to say today is that I'm asking everybody to vote no on these amendments. And let's start all over again. We're not going to start all over with this policy. But I talked to Councilmember Jane Prince, says it's one of the worst policies she ever seen. If it's one of the worst policies you ever seen, what do you have in place in our community? You got one of the biggest wars over here on the east side. You know what I'm saying? And on top of that, all the public safety stuff. So what I don't like about what the city doing, there's no affordable housing been built anywhere. I've been over here 15, 20 years. A Section 8 voucher won't do it. What needs to be done, I don't care what you build over there, Ryan Construction Company, the developers, the landlord, but one thing you need to make sure is that you're making sure that renters have a place to live. And thank you. Do the right thing today, especially you, Jane Prince.
My name's Catherine Banbury. I am in Clara's Ward 7. And I've spoken several times, and I am heartbroken and furious. I was also on the stakeholders. We did not vote for this exemption. We did not recommend for this exemption to affordable housing. I live in affordable housing. I live in Dominion affordable housing. I've been working with Councilmember Prince for 4 years that I've lived there. They've been around for 6 years. Nothing has changed. Our rent stabilization did not change this at all, other than the positive that the 8 buildings in St. Paul, the Dominion buildings, went up just under 8% so that they could self-certify and not have to talk to anybody. All the other Dominion buildings in the metro area went up 12.5%. 12.5%. We would have gone up 12.5% in St. Paul had it not been for this ordinance, and we would not have any recourse to appeal this rent increase, which we are doing. You know, adequate housing is only adequate if it is affordable. We had a lot of education on the stakeholders group, and Policy Link was one of them. And a quote from them: if all renters were charged affordable rent, households would have $124 billion to spend on other vital human needs, such as health care, such as healthy food, education, savings. Each renter household would have $6,200. When the rent is this high, people don't get what they need. This is so important. Paul Wellstone says everyone does better when everyone does better. Vote no on this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dana Kennedy. I live in Ward 4, and I'm a leader with Isaiah. Thank God for the people of St. Paul who voted for rent stabilization. In this wonderful city, which is majority renter, it is high time their voices were heard. For those of us who grew up in extreme poverty with terrible landlords and horrible living conditions, we know the value of stability. A tent is for camping, not a home in the dead of winter. Light rail and buses is for transportation, not for sleeping in. A car is for going from one place to another, not a home for a family. With the abundance in this great city, I just want to say it's time for bold ideas. And I want to thank Council Members Yang and Jalali and Mayor Carter for voting yes for the rent stabilization ballot measure last fall. And this was despite having raised nearly $5 million to try to defeat it. So I was so excited when rent stabilization took effect May 1st. I kept thinking about all of the kids who didn't have to live the childhood I did. And yet, I'm so disappointed now because, as people said, tens of thousands of our neighbors who live in affordable housing or new construction will have it taken away because of amendments that have been passed here and because of the gutting of the ordinance. So those who live in affordable housing won't get it. With new construction, I mean, with 20-year new construction, is an 18-year-old building really considered new? In closing, I ask you to vote no today on everything, and I look forward to taking another look at all of this. Thank you very much.
Members of the City Council, my name is Dwayne Johnson. I'm a homeowner in Ward 4 and a leader with Isaiah. I'm proud of all the efforts made to pass this policy. I simply want to say that I'm disappointed with some of the amendments to the rent stabilization ordinance as it is now written. Despite the adjustment, the vacancy decontrol is still too high. Landlords already have many legitimate options to raise rents beyond the 3% cap. The exemption for new housing construction is too long, plus the retroactive exemption feature will leave thousands of units without rent gouging protection. And exemptions for affordable housing leave many who are most in need unprotected. So I urge a no vote on the rent stabilization policy as it currently stands. We don't all agree, but I want to thank in particular Council members Jalali and Yang for their yes votes on last fall, as well as Mayor Carter. St. Paul is our home, and I have no doubt that we will continue to work toward policies that make this community a place where all of our residents can thrive. Thank you.
Council, my name is Sean Lim, and at the age of 22, I'm the program director at Minnesota Youth Collective. I'm here today beyond devastated to urge the St. Paul City Council to vote no on Ordinance 22-37. As someone who is myself priced out of Minneapolis and has found affordable rent in St. Paul the last 5 years, this policy is personal. Last November, St. Paul residents came together and organized tirelessly, pouring their time, their energy, and deeply personal stories, at times risking everything to win this historic policy. Collecting signatures and then fighting to pass, then preserve it. We engaged every single cross street of every single neighborhood of every single ward in the heat and in the snow. The 41-member stakeholder group assembled by the mayor was already disproportionately stacked with out-of-state corporate developers and landlords who zoomed in from beaches. That manufactured consent for this ordinance by watering down the policy. Now, the majority of this council is poised to gut it and render the voices of 31,000 St. Paul residents obsolete. The proposals outlined in this ordinance run directly counter to the policy that St. Paul voters passed and stray far afield from the compromises the rent stabilization work group reached hours and hours of grueling dialogue later. This ordinance goes directly against the democratically passed policy and completely subverts the will of the people, sowing distrust, disdain, and contempt for this elected body which is meant to serve us, the people of St. Paul. Voting through an ordinance that values property and profits over the lives of people will be disastrous and will disproportionately harm subsequent generations and posterity yet unborn who will no longer be able to afford to live in our city and will be priced out as our neighborhoods become gentrified. St. Paul is demonstrating that democracy is the standard, but only when democracy serves the powerful. Organized communities will always beat organized capital. We will not stand idly by as this council guts this historic policy. As we head into an election year next year in 2023, I trust that the residents of St. Paul and my neighbors will use every avenue and tool at our disposal to ensure that we protect vulnerable renters and ensure that anyone who is no longer aligned with their constituency is voted out of office and replaced with representatives who are rooted deeply in community.
Thank you.
In closing, I would like to thank Council members Jalali and Yang for their continued solidarity and unwavering support for working class people and
Thank you.
civilization.
Hi everyone, my name is B. It feels like this is my 5th time speaking, and every time I come up more disappointed in the council. With the exception of Councilmember Jalali and Yang, thank you for your hard work in protecting rent stabilization, as you should be doing. I heard about this policy getting gutted about a couple weeks ago when it took place, and I was beyond heartbroken. I think about the stories that I heard at the doors. I think about the people that I met along the way, and I was also a part of the mayor's faulty city council or city task force. In that task force, as Catherine mentioned, we had a guest speaker from Policy Link, Rashida Phillips, who gave an amazing presentation of what would actually happen. And I asked her straight up, what's going to happen in the next 5 years if we don't protect renters? She straight up said, these people are going to die. I'm not coming here for fluff. I'm not coming here to play little political games like most of you are doing. I'm here to be real with you about what's actually happening. People are losing access to housing. People are losing access to health. People are losing access to health care, and we aren't doing anything about it. This isn't an issue about having buildings. It's an issue about having access to these buildings, and so many people in St. Paul don't have it right now. What happened in November was not just passing a policy. It was about building community, building relationships, and showing actual people power. And a lot of people in St. Paul would agree. That's why they passed this policy. That's why we passed the council and did our own thing. But, you know, things just don't work out sometimes. I know that our communities are going to do well. Unlike most members of the council, people aren't bought out by corporate landlords and developers. We're going to keep coming back. This is not the end of this fight. We as the people did not raise over $5 million. We didn't even get close to that, yet we still won. So it is up to members of you, the council, if you want to be a part of the losing team who bought their way here, or if you want to be a part of the winning team who got there. Thank you. Do better.
President Bryn Moen and council members, my name is Elaine Eyre. I live in Ward 3 and I'm a member of MICA. I know some of you are concerned if the current amendments in Ordinance 2237 are not passed that the developers will pack up and leave St. Paul. That will not happen. Hopefully you've made the time to talk with Ed Getz or Tim Walsh to ask them if what the developers and some of the landlords have been telling you is accurate information. It would make sense to me if I had to make such a major decision, I would want to have information from both sides. And it's apparent that some of you have not done this. I live in Highland Park and haven't seen the continuous building I've seen the continuous building in Highland Bridge since the rent stabilization issue came up. Rhine Development did not stop building during this time. The ordinance that was approved by rent stabilization and the task force will not prevent developers and landlords from making a profit or union construction workers from making a livable wage. The exemption of the 3% rent cap on new construction for 15 years that was in the task force recommendation will have a negative impact on the number of affordable units that would have been built. 20% of St. Paul residents live in poverty. 333 low-income families in St. Paul are currently receiving $500 a month to help them have some financial stability. If you vote for an 8% rent increase on top of inflation costs and the other detrimental amendments proposed by President Bryn Moen and Councilmember Tolbert and some by Councilwoman Prince, then the $500 to help these families mentioned above will not be worth much. You will also be voting against your own goals in the St. Paul 2023 budget proposal that will state a focus on closing the gaps in economic opportunity.
Thank you.
Please reconsider your stance because what's at stake is the loss of affordable units, and there's not enough on the market right now.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Meg Daly. I'm a Ward 1 resident, and I'm now the advocacy manager at the Minnesota Youth Collective. And I'm here today because I support the rent stabilization policy passed by voters, so I am urging you to vote no on Ordinance 2237. Ordinance 2237 stands to throw the most vulnerable renters in our city back into housing precarity, and its potential negative impact on tens of thousands of our neighbors is simply unconscionable. Especially glaring is Ordinance 2237's exemption of affordable housing. For many people, affordable housing is the only housing they could obtain due to barriers in the tenant screening process. If Ordinance 2237 passes, these people will be further disadvantaged by our housing system, and I know none of us want that. When the majority of St. Paul voters in 6 out of 7 wards voted yes to keep St. Paul home, we knew what we were voting for. A policy that applies to all renters, but is designed to prioritize the stability of low-income and BIPOC renters who historically experience the most egregious rent gouging. On the subject of stability, it's clear some of you have become too comfortable where you sit. At the Minnesota Youth Collective, we work hard to engage young people in building a more just Minnesota and to develop the next generation of movement leaders. I promise you, we will remember what happens today next November. We need St. Paul leaders that work not for the real estate lobby, but for the people. Over the past year, thousands of people learned firsthand what is possible when we organize, work together, and put people before profit. And as the saying goes, you can't unring a bell. Thank you, Council Members Jalali and Yang, for your continued work toward housing justice in this city.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm back. Elaine Terone from Ward 4. Thank you for letting me speak to you again in support of rent stabilization as it was passed and before it was amended. I was glad to hear earlier in this meeting that property values in St. Paul since rent stabilization was passed have not gone down as the property owners predicted. Rent stabilization has not made those go down. I wanted to tell you about an article I recently read in Vox on September 14th. It was published. It said that inflation has risen nationwide 8% in the last year. And what are the major drivers of national inflation? One of the big three is rent. Rents have gone up in the last year 12.3% nationwide. Amending rent stabilization, which would be a force for keeping this inflation from happening in our city, amending it, these amendments are going to make it worse. The one amendment that you asked us to speak specifically about would exacerbate inflation by allowing rents to rise when somebody leaves an apartment 8% plus the rate of inflation. So this year, that would be 16%. I do not believe that low-income renters are seeing their incomes go up at that rate, right? We need rent stabilization in order to fight inflation, and I urge you to vote no specifically on the one amendment that has not yet been attached to this rent stabilization issue. Vote no, and also vote no on the whole thing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Ann Juergens. I'm a citizen of Ward 4, and I've been a tenant in Ward 4, a homeowner, and now I'm a member of a limited equity co-op in Ward 4. I've been involved in housing law for 46 years. I counted right before, since graduating from law school. And I started in the Bay Area of California, and there were a lot of housing and rent control and property tax initiatives that were very hard fought. I was on the Citizens Advisory Board that worked for months on implementation policies for the Tenant Protection Ordinance. I attended the court hearing where Paul Magnuson issued a preliminary injunction. He did not overturn the whole ordinance. He just said, we're going to stop it until we have a trial, a greater hearing on these issues that the landlords were raising. That is when you, to my shock and dismay, and all the other people who had worked hard on the Citizens Advisory Board, you repealed the ordinance rather than fight. Now the citizens responded by passing the rent stabilization ordinance, Not a neat, clean, great, perfect ordinance, but you weren't doing it. You repealed at the first pushback. Now, they're going to keep fighting you. Even if you got it by allowing, as Elaine said, a 24% rent increase this year, they are going to keep fighting you. I saw this before. And they will threaten. The people who have a lot of money at stake in rental housing, they make money the tenants are buying those buildings for them with their rent. We don't have a good way of taking that into account when we're talking about reasonable rate of return. So I urge you to keep the ordinance as it was passed by the citizens. Thank you very much. They're going to fight you all the way, the landlords.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the people who are here today. My name is Kate O'Connell. I'm in Ward 4. I'm grateful to say, very grateful to Council Member Mitra Jalali. You've worked very hard. Thank you, Council Member Yang. And I know that everyone in here is trying to do the right thing, but where we are right now is not the right place. I urge you to vote no. One of the many things that were difficult is that it makes no sense to exempt existing rental homes. Those places already exist, and your own rules assume that the rent that landlords are charging in the base year are sufficient to earn them a reasonable rate of return. That's because the rules assume that landlords know what they're doing. And I think that's the way to go. Don't have the look back. Don't take away protection that renters already have. That simply doesn't make sense. I want families that are currently living in project homeless families, homeless children and their families to be able to afford to live in St. Paul and not be priced out. And the difference between a 3% increase in rent and an 8% increase in rent is $50 per month in the very first year. And it exceeds $300 per month after 5 years. So your rules that allow 8% increases in rent are simply going to price people out of the market. So I heard earlier in one of the hearings, the council members were saying, we need more help from the state. And my question to you is, what are you going to do to ensure that there's more support for rent? Bring It Home Minnesota, or what is it that you're going to do? Because we are looking to you to be leaders. Thank you.
Hello again. My name is Reagan Reek, and I'm a tenant organizer with Homeline. I don't think that there's anything much more for me to say that hasn't been said by your constituents and other community leaders. But I am here again to reiterate that the affordable housing exemption, as well as the 20-year look-back period for new construction, will have disparate impacts on the renters of St. Paul that need the protections of rent stabilization the most. I'm struggling to discern if this council is really hearing the dozens of residents that have courageously come forward to tell you how this ordinance will strip them of the rights that they and their community have voted to enact. Based on how this ordinance has been gutted in the last few weeks, I would say no, you aren't listening, save for Councilmember Yang and Councilmember Jalali. Thank you. Voting yes on Ordinance 2237 will flagrantly disregard the reality of St. Paul renters and the will of the people in this community. I'm here today to again ask that you vote no on this ordinance. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council President, Council members, Carlos Garcia Velasco. I'm in Rebecca's ward now. We only get 2 minutes, right? So, and a lot of things have been said. There was a track laid long ago when people of color were denied access to housing and permanent housing to generate generational wealth. And when that track was laid, and a government that was kind of, created around white male patriarchy will always benefit and slant to benefit those folks. And we know who is the most homeless people in our community. I heard a lot of compassion here for folks that will be impacted by the levy. And I don't think that we should be divided and be against anyone, but I believe that my question is, do you have the same kind of compassion for the majority of the people, of your constituents? Jane and Rebecca, do you have that same kind of compassion for renters? Do you? Do the rest of you have the same type of courage as Member Jalali and Member Yang? Does your business always have to center profit? Does your business here at City Hall have to always center profits? Because the way you're doing business is not centering the humanity of people. Vote. We're going to be out here. It might not impact some of you, but it will impact some of you. And I just think that you're doing business with people who are interested in their profits, and you think you're the experts, and you've heard from the experts. We are your constituents. So we put you in office, and maybe we'll do our work so that we can make sure that there's the right type of leadership and representation. Do you have the courage of your peers? Do you have the compassion?
Thank you, council members, and President Bremoen. I have the unenviable position of following that up, and I am a boring speaker, and I'm going to keep it really short. So one of the things I want to bring up is the difference between intent and impact. I am assuming that folks on the City Council, I think, have said and committed to good intent, but the impact of these revisions is serious and is going to have a disproportionate negative impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color households and people with disabilities. And in particular, there are two issues that exist in the current iteration that must be changed if the city is committed to fulfilling its obligation under the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The first is the exemption for affordable housing. That is 7,200 households in the city of St. Paul, predominantly Black, Indigenous, and people of color households and people with disabilities who would lose a set of rights that exist today, that exists for other people, and those would go away. And once again, that would have a disproportionate impact. And might I add, well, I am very happy to see the 4D program be so successful in preserving affordability at 60% AMI for 10 years. Those properties, too, would be exempted from rent stabilization, and they have very light regulatory touch on them. They are privately owned. So if there is a problem associated with the needs of affordable housing developers, particularly mission-focused nonprofits, let's address that issue. But this blanket exception would create significant harm and falls into what in the Blackjack case, which is one of the principal fair housing cases, say the arbitrary quality of thoughtlessness. The second is the retroactive nature of the new construction exemption. There has been no articulated reason for exempting 20 years of already built buildings, but there is a substantial harm to existing renter households that will disproportionately harm Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and in particular, people who need accessible housing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Jalali would move to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails. All right, so we are, because there have been no amendments at this time, this ordinance is laid in its final form for 1 week, which is what is required. So this item is before us for a final vote. And I will look to my colleagues for thoughts before we go to a final vote. Ms. Yang.
Thanks, Council President. I made it really clear where I was 2 weeks ago that I would be voting no, and I will be voting no today on this, the amendments and the ordinance in front of us here. I am so grateful to all of the people who came and testified today. I really feel the fire in you, the fire in your belly that brings you to come and testify and fight for renters. And I want you to know that I am with you. One of the, I like the past year and a half, so much has happened. And when I reflect on it, the most disappointing thing to me is that we all don't agree on everything. We all came in, with many different values, some aligned, some not. And so we knew that having a neutral group was going to be so important. And when the results came back from the rent stabilization stakeholders group, what I saw was us, what was an amendment or a package of amendments that went so much further than what was even recommended. It went further and actually will be making so much more harm to renters, to people in our community who we know are getting taken advantage of and have been historically. And what it really comes down to is them continuing to not have a voice. So to me, this is so much about a power dynamic between renters and between landlords. And for us to not do our part in actually sticking to what was supposed to be neutral is so telling of where the council here is, a majority of you are. And I want to express how disappointed I am about that, because what I hear over and over are people in our city saying to us that they're struggling. Their wages are not increasing, but then the cost of living is. And so what we are doing here actually has so much impact to the people who came and said to us that they are struggling and they need our help. We are not going as far as we can in actually helping them. I also want to say that this isn't the end at all. Policies can be changed, they can be amended. And so organizing is something that must continue to happen. We can never think that there is an end or a deadline to it at all. And that's something that I will continue to do, to organize with all of you who came here in the chambers and many of the people who are not here as well. I also want to say that as somebody who ran for office to fight for renter protection, someone who was a renter, I am so proud that I voted in the way that I did, since the beginning, even when this was on the ballot too, because I voted in support of rent stabilization. I am so proud of how I voted. Councilmember Jalali, I'm so grateful to you for the way that you have championed renters. And today I will be voting no, and I'm so proud to do that. The work is not done, so let's keep going.
Is there other thoughts from my colleagues? Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who is here, especially people who've shown up repeatedly, not just in these hearings, but in the task force and all of last year. I'm also not going to vote today to support the proposed changes to St. Paul rent stabilization. My guiding principle that describes how I've come to this is that I ultimately believe we need both growth and racial equity to succeed as a city, and we shouldn't sacrifice racial equity in the name of growth. I spoke early on at this draft ordinance's introduction that while I see some adjustments in this policy that are necessary clarification, there are other pieces that just go much too far in stripping rent stabilization protections from large groups of renters that I represent. I worked very hard on and brought amendments to address the concerns I saw. We didn't just sit around saying no. We brought a counter policy to the table, and we took on what I saw as the most problematic aspects of the latest proposal. We did make some improvements to the policy through these efforts. I am proud that the latest version has a tenant notification clause now. That makes sure the city will notify you as a renter if your landlord requests an exception, and it also more than doubles the time that you will get to appeal if your landlord gets an exception. It also struck really overly broad disorderly conduct language, that was prone to racial bias and could and would get used by landlords to discriminate against people. I think it's also important to state that the latest version clarifies an additional issue with utilities. It better prevents landlords from tacking on utility, quote unquote, fees onto your rent in order to collect more money from you, which is a way that they're working around the cap. It's wrong, and this helps tighten that hole. Also, based on a task force recommendation, while the new language now unfortunately allows landlords to raise rents once a unit is vacated, it at least requires them to use a just cause notice process. This means landlords can't raise rent on a tenant unless they vacate the unit for a defined set of acceptable reasons. I I deeply believe we'll need to build a strong enforcement process to make this practice meaningful in practice, but the reintroduction of just cause notice in some form was fought for very hard by fair housing advocates on the task force, and I believe you deserve credit for this smart policy trade-off. That is an important accomplishment, and I don't want to erase that. While I appreciate these changes, and many have been necessary to make, I feel that they are very overshadowed by far more troubling changes. The most glaring to me continues to be, as many people spoke about today, the complete removal of rent stabilization protections for basically all types of affordable, subsidized housing. In my ward, this includes my constituents, major properties with hundreds of people living in buildings along the Green Line, and residents who are overwhelmingly people of color and low-income renters. I would just put it very simply that I will not vote to take rent stabilization away from my constituents who need it the most. I also want to speak to a very high-profile sub-issue in this whole process, which is the discussion around a new construction exemption. What's being proposed in the policy goes beyond what the task force recommended and is a 20-year exemption that is retroactive, which means all buildings built in St. Paul during the last 20 years are also being counted as new construction. And simply put, I don't support removing rent stabilization protections from people who currently have them. And I represent a part of the city where the lion's share of new construction has been built. And I have championed that new construction. I have fought very hard to grow more housing in our city. I represent a transit-rich, rapidly changing part of St. Paul, federally designated opportunity zone, commercial corridors, public bus, rail, and car share throughout. And we have more, if not the most, new housing relative to almost anywhere else in the city. I think the only comparison could be in Lower Town and the booming new population we have downtown now. So I know that we need to build our city and build more housing. The problem is that we can't do that on the backs of people who need rent stabilization and are already here. And we can't pass a new construction exemption that is unqualified without anything that we're getting out of that. We do need investment in our city, but we need anti-displacement policy that goes with it, and we still can't answer because we repealed safe housing tenant protections. We can't say what protections as a renter do you get if you're in a new building and you don't get rent stabilization. You get Minnesota state law, which is notoriously weak for renters. We have to fix that, and I just can't support a new construction exemption the way it's written and the way it will disproportionately impact my constituents. I will continue to work to address the gaps that this is leaving behind in the future. Last thing I want to say is that I know that this moment in the journey for rent stabilization feels very painful for so many people here who have fought for this policy, but I want to take a minute to share what I think we have accomplished together. We are still the only city in the upper Midwest to have any kind of rent stabilization. We are still arguably the strongest renter protection city in the state of Minnesota. We have forced a more explicit conversation about how supply alone is both necessary and not sufficient to address our housing crisis. We have preserved in this latest draft the 3% rent cap, and most significantly, we have defended the policy from a full repeal against very considerable odds. And I think those are important things to name, even when it just feels like so much is being taken away. I'm not going to let the hard work that we did be completely erased. So thank you for your fight. I'm going to keep on fighting. I am not voting yes today. I am committed to working into the future for the city that I know we can make it be. Thank you.
Other comments before we go to a final vote? Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. I want to thank everyone who is here today, everyone who has been part of this process to date. I want to thank all of my colleagues. I think we've had some really important and some really difficult conversations at this table over the last few months. And I've been listening throughout this process, and I have continued to hear this debate framed in a particular way as one side versus the other, tenants versus developers, council members versus other council members. And actually, as I have been listening, I have heard a lot of themes of commonality in what people have said. I've heard that we all want families to have stability in their homes. And we all want more housing so that current tenants and also future tenants can live here in St. Paul. And we want housing so that tenants can have more choice and more affordability and then more power. And the questions I think we've been wrangling very visibly with over multiple weeks, multiple versions at this table, but also at the stakeholders group, in the public, are about how to make sure that this ordinance does both, that it protects renters and ensures a supply of housing. And I actually think those are two sides of the same coin. Those aren't actually different issues. For me, the most important features of these amendments are the preservation of the 3% cap, expanding tenant notifications, not only for when your landlord requests an exemption, but also when you're moving into a unit that may or may not be rent controlled, providing confidence in our market by exempting new construction, and creating the first ever just cause on our books, among other things. I don't think this package of amendments is perfect. I think policy rarely is, but I do think that after all of this discussion, all of this back and forth, I think it strikes the right balance, and I will be supporting it today.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Prince.
Yeah. I want to thank all the council members who've spoken. I want to second what Council Member Naker just said. All of us on this council have been very strong affordable housing advocates since we were elected. And I have worked with so many of you on trying to get affordable housing built, and we're getting there. The city put $40 million of our ARPA dollars into deeply affordable housing development for people at 30% of median income or less. So I hope that we can continue to work together on making this a good city for renters and for people of the working poor that can't afford our market. I thank you all for being here. I believe I have tried to be responsive to the renters and the landlords in my ward that include a lot of small landlords for whom their 4-unit or duplex or triplex unit is their retirement income. They want to provide affordable housing to their neighbors. And this ordinance, I believe, has discouraged a lot of small property owners from staying in the business. But we don't need to argue about that. You have a different view of this. I will say that I share your concern about the fact that I support the 3% cap. The amendments that we're passing continue to keep that safe. That is what the voters stated. But the rules that have been set by the city, not by this council, are the ones that have said you can raise rent, you can self-certify to raise rent up to 8%. And I have stated very clearly, I think that's a terrible place for us to be. We're there partly because we cannot afford adequate staffing to do the kind of auditing of those proposals that have come in. But I do want to say I am ready to work with anybody on revisiting the rules that allow a self-certified 8% rent increase. That is not what the voters voted for, and I don't support it. So in any event, I believe that these amendments are the right thing for this policy, for the city. And as Council President Brenmoen has said on many occasions, we're going to see where this goes. Ordinances can be revisited. But in any event, I am going to support the amendments today. And in some cases, I believe that additional amendments may be needed at some point. I think we made it better in significant ways, and that includes the tenant notice and the tenant appeal process. So with that, I will be voting yes.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. So I'm looking to see if anybody else has comments. So I will turn it over to Mr. Tolbert, who was our HRA chair and a representative on the advisory panel, to close us up.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I want to thank everybody who came out today and previous, and also all my colleagues today. What we've seen over the past couple months is the council attempting at this table to work on very complex legislation. I think that's one of the reasons that voter initiatives are so difficult, is because they don't have that give and take. And what this council has done is, in my opinion, I think we should celebrate this, is made proposals, made amendments to those proposals, voted for some changes, voted against some changes, to try and hammer out this package. And I think that's responsible, thoughtful governing, and I really appreciate everybody at this table for being a part of that. I suspect that if all 7 of us sat in a room by ourselves and wrote an ordinance about rent stabilization, we'd come with 7 different versions of it. You add the mayor in, he'd probably have 8 different versions. But part of governing is having that give and take, compromising, and asserting priorities in different things. In this case, I think we've had, in my opinion, one of the most public outreach, public feedback, and conversation of any ordinance that at least I've been a part of. The work group had a substantial amount of people, 41 people that met weekly for 2 hours every single day. That Cura work group had a public hearing. We had a public hearing on the Cura report here at this council table. And now this is our 3rd public hearing that this ordinance has had, obviously different variations each time, but we've had 3 public hearings on this ordinance. And I think that's great. And I think we've had a lot of feedback and a lot of thought as we try and hammer out this policy. I appreciate everybody on their thoughtful work on this, and I just especially want to make a few shout outs for people. The task force members, I really appreciate them, especially the co-chairs, Tony Santa and Philip Cryan, who did a ton of work, as well as every single member. The community members who have been a part of this throughout the time, both here at the council tables. I know we've all gotten emails, stopped in the grocery store, at coffee shops, at Como yesterday. We've had a lot. I appreciate the city staff who've really had to do the difficult job of trying to figure out to pass an ordinance that's implementable. And I think that's one of the hard things, and one of the things that we talked about a lot in the task force is values and priorities were passed, but writing that is always into a law is always harder than talking about it. And the staff at the city, the professional staff that we have, specifically from the city attorney's office, Department of Safety and Inspections, the mayor's office, our legislative aides, especially mine, Adam Eust, Marcia Mormond, and other council staff who've spent considerable amount of time and hours working on this, revising it. I know our city attorney's office have drafted, well, you can see it on the register, how many amendments they've had to draft in addition to the ordinances. And we just have a great professional staff that has tried to help us put our values, our priorities, and our policy positions into writing. And that's always a difficult thing to do. It's ever since I've joined this job, I've always said, writing an ordinance is a lot different than having thoughts on different policy positions. And so I really appreciate the staff that has spent a lot of time on this. I think what we have forward is not necessarily perfect, but I believe it is, based on this conversation, based on the public outreach, I think it is a huge improvement to try and get stable housing for people who live in St. Paul. I know a lot of people have different opinions on this actual policy and the different provisions of it, but I do think we all have very similar shared values. And sometimes a difference in how to achieve those values or achieve those goals shouldn't be mistaken as a different shared value. We all want to produce more housing, both market rate and affordable.
We listen to you. I'd like to ask you to keep your comments to yourself while Mr. Tolbert is speaking. Thank you.
We want to preserve quality, natural, or occurring affordable housing in this city. And we want to further invest in dedicated need-based affordable housing in the city. I know that not everybody agrees with the same solutions, but I think we all owe it to people to do what, based on all the information that we have, to make the best decisions to reach those goals. I think this ordinance and the improvements that we've made to it will hopefully help carry out the issues that brought rent stabilization to the ballot of protecting renters, protecting against rent spikes, and that, while also hopefully minimizing the negative consequences of the policy that we have seen and I believe would continue to see without these amendments, and that's important. This, I know my colleagues have talked about this, but this ordinance adds additional renter protections and notifications for tenants. It keeps the 3% annual increase. It provides more flexibility for property owners to reinvest in their property at the more natural time when the turnover or vacancy happens. It allows routes for additional investments in properties, which we want people to do, is to invest and reinvest in properties so that we have quality housing in the city of St. Paul. And it addresses some of the financing issues that the current ordinance has regarding building new construction and building new housing in the city of St. Paul. Also, I hope that the revisions, and this is owed to staff, hopefully simplifies, clarifies, and makes easier to understand how this ordinance operates, both for people who own properties as well as renters. And I think that's a really important thing, is clarifying that for everybody. I know we've spent a lot of time talking at this table about affordable housing and actually trying to build affordable housing. I suggest by coincidence, we had the HRA here today and talking about some of the programs that we've initiated over the last 5 or so years at the HRA. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which we've used in many different ways, especially during the pandemic. The ARP priority, I think our number one allocation of money from the ARP dollars that came down went to affordable housing and to 30% area median income, which is the hardest to build and has to be built with public subsidy. And we've led with it in our values. Just today, and this will be on the HRA agenda next week, I approved to go on the agenda the Lumen at Highland Bridge. The Lumen at Highland Bridge is a huge success. It's going to be 60 units of 30% area median income housing that will be built on the Highland Bridge site. This was made possible because of a unique financing that we have started at Highland Bridge, because one of the things that we've tried to do is look for additional resources, since the federal government and the state have not provided those additional resources, desperately needed additional resources that we need for housing. The way that we set it up is that the TIF district will take the increment from the market rate project. In this case, it's the Marvella Presbyterian Home Senior Housing, and the increment off that building will help subsidize the 30% AMI housing at the Lumen. But I should note that just that TIF alone is not enough. In addition to that, there's dollars from Minnesota Housing, there's dollars from Ramsey County, and there's low-income tax credits. That's pretty much the slew of tools that we have, and all are tapped in for one project. It's not all the money that each of those sources have, but it's all for one project. Because building affordable housing is really expensive, and that's something we up here at this table get frustrated with all the time. And we need to continue to invest in that. And one of the speakers last week talked about the surplus at the state, and they're exactly right. We need more dedicated funds for affordable housing. We need more dedicated funds to help support people in that housing for going on to it. And I think that's really important. But we also need market rate housing to be built too. I think this amendment should help with that. I think this amendment should help use the unique tools, that the one that I just talked about at the Lumen. That model is one that I hope that we can use at Hillcrest and across at scattered sites across the city. I think it's a unique model that we've come up with, but it requires that market rate partner to help finance the affordable housing. Big picture, I just want to say, I think and I hope that this amendment improves the existing policy for both renters and property owners. I hope it adds additional protections for renters, and I think it will also ensure that we can continue to invest and reinvest in building housing in the city. I think we will have some changes as time goes by. Circumstances will come up that we didn't foresee as we wrote this policy that will need to be addressed. Rules will need to be written. But I think big picture, bringing some stability to the rules and stability to housing long-term is the best thing, not only for St. Paul now, but for the future of the city of St. Paul. And I think this amendment helps do that, and I would encourage my colleagues to vote for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. Any other conversation? I would just be remiss if I didn't thank you, Mr. Tolbert, for your work on this. I know many council offices and council aides audited the Kira group, but you were our representative and have been leading on moving these recommendations from the task force and engaging our broader community in drafting the amendment. And I appreciate your work on this, Adam Youth's work on this, and just the work that you've personally done to help bring this to this point in the process. And we really appreciate that. I know it's been a lot of work, so thank you so much for that. So now this is before us for a final vote. I will take a motion from Mr. Tolbert, and we will go to a roll call.
Prince,
Yes.
Tolbert,
Yes.
Yang,
No.
Ballinger,
Yes.
Jalali,
No.
Naker,
Aye.
Council President Brenmoen.
Aye.
5 in favor, 2 opposed, being Council Members Yang and Jalali. The ordinance is adopted. Item 23 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-217, authorizing the Department of Parks and Recreation to accept gifted funds from the Ramsey Hill Association and to amend the financing and spending plan in the amount of $9,951.70 for the Cochran Park Fountain Project.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Councilmember Ballinger moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 24 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-250, amending the financing and spending plans in the capital budget and debt budget to repay federal grant funding.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Mr. Ballinger moves approval. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries.
7 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 25 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-252, amending the financing and spending plans in Department of Public Works capital budget to close out 2016 projects.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Seeing none, Ms. Prince moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 26 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-266, authorizing the acceptance of $1,074 reimbursement from the State Historic Preservation Office for Historic Preservation Commissioner and staff member to attend the annual Preservation Conference on September 14th to the 16th, 2022.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, Ms. Jalali moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 27 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-271, adopting the 2023 operating plan for the Downtown Improvement District and imposing a service charge pursuant to Minnesota Statutes, Chapter 428A.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak to this item? Seeing none, I have received some correspondence that several of the folks involved in this item did not realize that the public hearing was going to be today, and I have just received that communication during the meeting. So I am looking to our city attorney and I guess to our city clerk to know if it's a problem to lay this matter over for a week. I would like to move that if it's not a concern.
As far as your rules and procedures, there's no problem. I don't know anything specific about this file.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move a 1 week layover of this item and continue the public hearing for 1 week. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is continued to September 28th. Item 27, was that the one I just read?
Yeah.
Sorry. Item 28 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-273, authorizing the Department of Parks and Recreation to accept Parks and Trails legacy funds, enter into grant agreements, and amend the financing and spending plan in the amount of $2,562,053.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Thanks for being here, Ms. Messer. Seeing none, Ms. Yang moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 29 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-274, approving the application of Meritage Restaurant for a sound level variance in order to present amplified sound during Oyster Fest on October 9th at 99 6th Street West.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Seeing none, Mr. Tolbert moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 30 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-277, approving the application of University of St. Thomas Aaron Whipkey Campus Life for a sound level variance in order to present amplified sound on October 15th at 2115 Summit Avenue of University of St. Thomas.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Seeing none, Ms. Jalali moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Item 31 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-279, approving the application of University of St. Thomas Aaron Whipkey Campus Life for sound level variance in order to present live amplified sound on October 15th at 2115 Summit Avenue.
Point of order, is this the same? Yeah.
They just have the same title, but they have different file IDs.
Okay. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak on this item? Seeing none, Mr. Ballinger moves to close the public hearing and approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the resolution is adopted. Legislative hearing consent agenda items 32 through 41 are before you for your consideration.
Welcome, Ms. Mormont.
Vice President Naker, I'm not aware of anyone here to testify on a legislative hearing item.
And in that case, we will see if there's anyone here to testify on any item on our legislative hearing agenda. Seeing none, Ms. Prince moves the balance of the consent agenda, which is the entire consent agenda. All in favor?
As amended.
As amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
7 in favor, no one opposed, or 6 in favor, no one opposed. The public hearing is closed and the consent agenda is adopted as amended.
That brings us to the end of our agenda. I don't think it's too late to do some good news from around the wards if anyone has any. Ms. Yang.
Thank you. I have 3 events to share. The first one is being hosted by St. Paul Public Libraries. It's over at Arlington Hills Library this Saturday from 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. And it's Drag Story Hour, which is a fun, family-friendly event that brings together traditional library story time with the performance Art of Drag. This is an interactive, joyful program that celebrates diverse, creative gender expression for children and their caring adults with stories, music, dance, laughter, and art, and themes of resilience, kindness, and self-love. I heard, there's so many people who attend. In 2018, there were more than 500 people who attended a total of 3 programs, and in 2019, more than 300 attended. And so really looking forward to having a lot of people in attendance this year, too. The second event that I wanted to share is the artist reception and closing event for the Solidarity Street Gallery. It is an annual art exhibit that's held in Ward 6 every year, and you'll get a chance to meet the artists who submitted their art for the gallery. This year's theme, it features Southeast Asian communities and their resilience. I got a chance to go and see it, and it's really, really phenomenal. So highly recommend everyone to go. It is happening tomorrow, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., and it's at 967 Payne Avenue. The last event I wanted to share is the unveiling of Marnie Zhang Memorial Library. I have a flyer here that I'm going to be handing to all of the council members. I have enough just for you all, but I'll be emailing this out to the council and also the mayor's office too. But everyone in the public is welcome to attend it. Marnie Zhang, she was our former St. Paul School Board Chair and also social justice, racial equity organizer, social justice fighter. She passed away in June of 2020 from COVID-19. I can't believe it's already been 2 years. Time really flew by, but this is something that's been happening this is something that's been in the works for a while now, and so we're doing an unveiling for her to remember her. And there's going to be a mural there. You all can check it out, and there will be food too. So please come and join us. The event is on Thursday, so it's next week, but I wanted to give everyone a heads up. It's next Thursday, September 29th, The doors open at 5 p.m. and the program begins at 5:30. It'll be at Washington Tech Magnet School, which is on 1495 Rice Street in St. Paul. So if you want to register ahead of time, that'd be great. You can go to spps.org/RSVP. Hope to see you all there.
Thanks so much, Ms. Yang. Really appreciate you lifting up Drag Story Hour. It's a really wonderful event and something that I think all of us should be out there supporting, and also really looking forward to attending Marty's unveiling next week. It sounds like it'll be a beautiful ceremony, so thank you. Other good news? Ms. Prince?
I hope it's okay with Councilmember Tolbert if I bring up something happening in his ward. I believe Crosby Farm Park is in your ward, right? On September 25th, that's Sunday, from 11:30 to 2:30, the Golden Rule ship will be visiting Watergate Marina as part of their Great Loop Voyage. This family-friendly event was launched by Veterans for Peace and aims to advance their opposition to nuclear war. There will be tours of the boat available, and music, children's games, and a potluck in the park. Again, Sunday, 11:30 to 2:30 at Crosby Farm Park. Veterans for Peace recovered and restored the original peace ship, the Golden Rule, that set sail in 1958 to stop nuclear weapons tests in the Marshall Islands, and which inspired the many peacemakers and peace ships that followed. The reborn Golden Rule is sailing once more to show that nuclear abolition is possible and that bravery and tenacity can overcome militarism.
Thanks, Ms. Prince. Mr. Tolbert doesn't look too upset. I've been watching his face the whole time. Mr. Ballinger, did you have one? Or
no, I didn't.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw you. Okay. I will just share two quick ones. One is a constituent reached out to let me know about a day I never knew about. This Saturday, the fourth Saturday of September, is National Fish Amnesty Day. And it's a time to remind people that animals should be respected, not killed for fun. And one activity that's recommended on this day instead of fishing is trash fishing, which is an activity suitable for people of all ages that involves removing litter rather than fish from the water. So thought that was a great idea and wanted to share that out with everyone. And then tomorrow, Thursday the 22nd, from 4 to 6 p.m. in Landmark Plaza, the Capitol River Council, which is the downtown district council, is going to be hosting a listening session open to all in the community to share their thoughts on downtown. So I plan to stop by, and I hope others will consider doing that as well. Is there anything else to come before us tonight? If not, thanks for a great meeting. We're adjourned.
To you about carbon monoxide and carbon monoxide alarms. Carbon monoxide